In this edition of I Escape, a self-proclaimed innocent soldier flees his prison cell in paradise.
You could actually see, you could taste freedom at that point, so it was very exhilarating.
And the Alcatraz escape they didn't want you to know about.
He finally made it, and he broke the escape-proof myth.
Around the world, there are over 9 million prisoners behind bars. These are the stories of the few who dared to break out. Monaco, located on the Mediterranean, it's best known as a playground for the rich and famous. Ex-Green Beret Ted Maher arrived from the U.S. in August 1999, landing a green job working for 67-year-old multi-billionaire Edmund Safras. But 4 months later, the billionaire and a female nurse perished in a blazing inferno at his penthouse apartment. Hired to protect Safras, Maher claims armed assailants had broken in.
There was an assassination attempt on his life, and I stopped that assassination attempt and almost lost my life.
After being stabbed by the intruders, Maher claims he lit a fire in a wastepaper basket to trigger alarms.
Within 5 minutes, there was around 86 of Monaco's finest police department showing up and 56 firemen, and then for the next slightly under 3 hours, everybody stood around and did absolutely nothing.
By the time authorities got to the penthouse apartment, Safras and the female nurse are dead from smoke inhalation. Maher's wound required 100 staples. His wife Heidi rushed to Monaco, but when she arrived, the finger was pointing at her husband.
The whole case couldn't have been scripted. It was absolutely stuff of Hollywood.
Maher's trial took 3 years. He claimed that Monaco police coerced him to confess by threatening his wife's safety. And he asked why other bodyguards had been given the night off. All to no avail. Maher was given 10 years for manslaughter.
I was told that I was going to be set free after the trial, that I was going to be looking at worse involuntary manslaughter charge at the worst case scenario based on the inaccuracy and the gross incompetence of the firemen and police department, and I was given double that.
In 2002, Ted Maher was sent to Monaco's only prison. Built in the 17th century, it was worlds away from the paradise below.
It was probably one of the best prisons in the world, physically wise. But on the flip side of that, it was probably the worst prison in the world, psychologically. You could never speak to anybody.
With deep cell windows layered with mesh, Monaco's prison was thought to be totally secure. But Ted Maher was hell-bent on breaking out. Locked up alone, his plan required an accomplice. So Maher hooks up with Italian Luigi Pierdelli. Luigi was being held for armed robbery charges in Italy.
He wasn't a very happy camper, as Americans would say, about his incarceration in Monte Carlo. There was no formal arrest warrant or nothing on him, so he was basically there waiting.
Luigi convinces the prison director Maher is a suicide risk and suggests he be moved into the same cell.
Why don't you put me in with Ted so I can keep an eye on him? And the prison director said, oh, that's a very good idea, Luigi. So that was phase one.
Maher's plan is simple. They'll climb out their cell window and down to the ground. But first they need the tools to hack their way through the bars and mesh. Maher smuggles a letter to his sister in America. Distressed by his plight, she hides 4 small hacksaw blades and a Bible to be delivered by a priest who visits Maher regularly.
The person that was bringing it in had recent cardiac surgery and could not be passing through a metal detector because of a pacemaker. So that worked out very well.
Maher begins to saw away at the 46 individual steel strands in the grill.
You could only make small cuts because otherwise it would be like a violin, making a squeaking sound, so you had to be very, very quiet.
But the galvanized mesh is tougher than he expected.
Had barely cut through just that first level with 2 blades being as smooth as a baby's bottom, on all the teeth completely ruined, and I didn't realize that I didn't know at that point if I was going to make it.
To conceal each night's work, they meticulously glue the wires back together with surplus smuggled from the library by Luigi.
If you don't touch, but you point where the cut is, there's no way you could find it. And I made sure that it was 100% effective.
After 3 grueling weeks, Maher is finally through the grill. His next challenge, 1.5-inch thick steel bars. Unlike the mesh, the bars are surprisingly soft. But at 6'3", it'll be a tight squeeze.
My sternum to my back spine is exactly 22.5 centimeters. So I could practice going through those steel bars in between the ladder on the bunk beds and knowing that you had to relax and not panic because you would get stuck.
2 weeks after cutting through the mesh, Maher finally saws through the last layer of bars.
first time I saw green in the promenade there in the garden, and you could actually see, you could taste freedom at that point, so it was very exhilarating.
But there's a huge problem. A swivel head security camera is right above them.
It's impossible, absolutely impossible. With all the cameras showing, not happen.
Monaco, playground of the rich and famous, January of 2003. American Ted Maher and his Italian accomplice Luigi Chiardelli are facing a 40-foot drop out of their prison window.
I fabricated a cord made out of plastic bags, and this was a total of 46 bags that I folded and scotch taped together and weaved together to formulate a very, very strong rope.
Their rope is ready, but what about the security camera?
I clocked it and we did a 45-second pan from left to right, and realizing that I had 22 and a half seconds to be out of the camera's way.
On January 22nd, Maher and Luigi are ready to go. After removing the mesh and bars from the window, they tie their plastic rope to a bent bar.
Waited for the camera to pan left and to the right, drew out the cord, and at that point, Luigi went first.
With only 22 and a half seconds, Ted Maher is next. Neither are spotted, but then to Maher's dismay, Luigi runs away.
As soon as his feet hit the ground, I guess he felt that he would be better off alone, and he took off.
Without his interpreter and guide, Maher's planned escape route through Italy is now dead in the water.
So here I am. I don't speak a word of Italian, which if I went to Italy, I would have been picked up immediately.
Maher is now an escapee on the run in a country with more police per capita than anywhere else on Earth.
No matter how you approach Monaco, you have to go past a policeman, and if for any reason whatever, they will stop you and ask to see your identity papers, which by law you have to have.
Because of his high profile, Maher needs to disguise himself, and fast.
I took one of the sweaters that I had and cut the sleeve off, took dental floss and tied the distal end of it, inverted it and rolled it up, and it's a perfect hat. Looked like a designer hat. Put the hat on, and took a pair of Luigi's glasses that he had for reading, and put those on.
Heavily disguised, Maher bumps into a couple of policemen and risks using one of the few French phrases he knows.
Bonsoir, monsieur, comment ça va? And talked to them, and they waved to me, and I would continue to walk out.
But the encounter leaves him rattled.
So I realized I had to get out of there.
Crossing the unguarded border into France, Maher hikes 12 and a half miles to the nearest city, Nice.
It was very, very cold. In fact, I was sweating profusely because even though I was in great shape, it was freezing, and I actually developed a mild case of hypothermia.
Once in Nice, he was desperate to get out of the cold. But it's 3 o'clock in the morning. With no money, no ID, and unable to speak French, Maher risked knocking on the door of a budget hotel.
The story was, excuse me, sir, my car is broken down on the auto route. You know, I look at me, I'm exhausted. It's in the middle of the morning. I've gone to try to reach for my wallet. I've lost my wallet. Can you allow me to make a collect call to my family so that I can get a room here for the night until I can, get some identification?
The manager buys his story.
Just help yourself.
Maher phones his wife, Heidi, who tirelessly supported him throughout the trial. But the call doesn't go well.
I can't help you. I don't have any credit cards, nothing. Slammed the phone down. I can't believe this.
Heidi has finally lost faith in her husband.
She was convinced that I was guilty.
Maher next calls his priest.
My family gave him money, to put on my account when he visited me for communion in the prison every couple weeks. He said, Father Ball, I'm free right now. I need to recover the money that my family has given you so I can make safe passage to U.S. territory. Can you help me? Ted, no problem. I'll get it out of the bank. Call me tomorrow morning at 10:30.
Having put his trust in a man of the cloth, Maher finally relaxes.
I'm in the hotel. I'm exhausted. I'm shaking because of hypothermia. I get into this tub and take a nice hot bath and just sit back and just really, I've done it. Everything's going to be all right.
He soaks up his newfound freedom, having no idea he's placed his faith in the wrong man.
At 10:30 in the morning, I made the phone call to speak to Father Ball in Monte Carlo. And I said, Father Ball, this is Ted. He goes, the man you want is on the phone. I'm in shock. I can't believe he's passing the phone over to police. I hung up.
The Monaco police then traced the phone call, found out it came from a small hotel in Nice.
They immediately contact the local police.
I didn't have enough time to get on my jockeys and put up my pants and run downstairs, and I opened up the door, and there was 5 French nationals waiting for me.
Maher gives himself up without a struggle.
I'm done. It's finished. there's no point. They have guns. I'm not going to get killed over this.
Turned in by those he trusted most, Maher's meticulously planned escape is finished.
I didn't expect to be betrayed by a woman that I loved, the attorney that was representing me as an American citizen, and a priest. It doesn't get any worse than that.
Maher's Italian accomplice, Luigi Chiardelli, survived on the run for 2 months before being caught.
He was picked up on a vagrancy charge right next to the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Maher was returned to Monaco to serve out the remainder of his sentence, along with another 9 months for the escape.
Only 3 people really know what happened inside that penthouse apartment. One of them is Ted Maher, one of them is Edmund Safra, and one of them is the nurse that died.
After spending 8 years behind bars, Maher was released from Monaco prison in October 2007 and maintains his innocence to this day. Coming up, reality meets legend as 2 inmates escape from Alcatraz. Alcatraz, San Francisco Bay, 1962. The most famous prison in the world. Known as the Rock, it was an island fortress that was impossible to escape from. But that didn't stop them from trying.
The point was, they thought that it was escape-proof because of this treacherous bay. Alcatraz captured the imagination of the American public and eventually the world because it was an island and because it was allegedly escape-proof. And it was the first Supermax pen. Up until 1962, quite a few people had tried to escape from Alcatraz and none had been successful.
Of the many attempted escapes, there hadn't been one single survivor. John Paul Scott was determined to change that. A career criminal convicted of armed robbery, sentenced to 30 years. And Darrell Lee Parker, also convicted of armed robbery, sentenced to 50 years. Scott and Parker had 2 choices: rot in jail or risk certain death trying to escape. On Alcatraz, every prisoner has to work. Scott and Parker are assigned to kitchen duty. It was easy work, and their supervision was lax. They were left alone, sometimes for 10 minutes at a time, and the window in the storeroom below the kitchen could not be seen by the guard's watchtower. Their problem was that it was secured by 1.5-inch thick steel bars. Although they knew it would take years to cut through the bars, the pair calculated that this was their best chance of escape. But Alcatraz was due to close within a year, and prisoners were already beginning to be relocated to other prisons. Desperate to escape, and knowing time was against them, Scott and Parker knew they had to come up with a much quicker way to get through those bars. That was when a departing prisoner told Scott he wasn't the first to try and cut his way to freedom.
This was an escape attempt that was really planned by other people. And when those people were transferred, the plans sort of got transferred to Scott.
Relays of prisoners had quietly been sawing away at the bars for years.
They also used string impregnated with floor wax and something like Ajax, cleansing, which is surprisingly abrasive. And they sawed those bars over months, a little bit at a time, a little bit here and there.
Guards regularly checked the bars on the cells and prison windows, but the storeroom had been overlooked.
That was one place we didn't really check the bars like we did their cells, where you'd hit them with a rubber hammer, and if it's a kind of a blunt sound, then you know there's a problem.
Scott and Parker knew once through the bars, they would face 3 major challenges. The first, to make it to the water undetected. Second, it's now December and the water is freezing. Third, the bay around Alcatraz is swarming with man-eating sharks. But it's a risk the 2 are willing to take. Alcatraz, San Francisco Bay, winter 1962. John Paul Scott and Darrell Lee Parker have cut through the bars in the prison's kitchen storeroom. After a routine head count, they make their move. The 2 inmates squeeze through the small holes in the bars and drop to the ground. Out of sight of the guard tower, they shimmy up a drain pipe onto the roof of the main cell block. Then they sprint across the roof to the southwestern corner of the building. So far, avoiding detection, Scott and Parker lower a 50-foot-long electrical cord to the cliffs below. They slide down the cable into the darkness. As Scott and Parker scramble down the treacherous cliffs to the water's edge, Parker injures his ankle. And now they are facing a long swim in freezing conditions. A swim that no one had ever survived. They begin to blow up rubber gloves and then stuff the inflated gloves into their sleeves and tie more around their waists to keep them afloat. The escape so far has taken only 7 minutes. Moments later, Scott and Parker plunge into the icy water and begin their perilous 1.25 mile swim across the bay. Just 10 minutes later, at 5:47, the alarm is raised. After a random head count, prison guards discover the pair is missing. A massive manhunt immediately swings into action. Aside from struggling to swim in the freezing shark-infested waters, they also now had to contend with the raging current sweeping out into the Pacific Ocean.
75% of every day, you cannot swim from the island to the city because the tides are really going to take you in another direction and a far more treacherous direction.
Once in the icy water, the two are quickly separated. Parker's broken ankle is slowing him down. Unable to help, Scott pushes on alone for the mainland. Parker's dream of freedom turns into a nightmare as he clings onto a small cluster of rocks just 300 feet from Alcatraz. The guards spot him from the towers and start shooting.
And then when I was ordered around to pick him up, he was hurting. He was cold, his ankle was broke, and I got him and took him back around to the dock.
Back out in the freezing waters of the bay, Scott has disappeared into the darkness.
And then I start patrolling. The tide was going out at the time, so we'd go from San Francisco over to the north shores, back and forth, and I was looking for Scott.
Despite a giant manhunt, it seems Scott had either slipped through the net or drowned.
There was a sense of frustration, yes. And the water was very rough. We were up and down and around and trying to find somebody in that water, and I knew it was going to be difficult. And it was. And we did not spot him.
Exhausted and freezing, John Scott had reached the rocks underneath the south side of the Golden Gate Bridge.
Scott worked for 2 hours swimming and floating towards San Francisco, but he finally made it, and he broke the escape-proof myth.
However, Scott was now desperately fighting hypothermia and extremely close to death. He lay slowly dying on the rocks for almost an hour before he was discovered by a passing soldier, taken to a military base, and then handed over to Alcatraz authorities.
Scott even looked up at me when they were bringing him back at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I looked down at him. He was on a stretcher. And he said, "Mahoney, why didn't you pick me up?" And I said, "Well, I was looking for you."
The myth that Alcatraz was escape-proof was shattered by John Paul Scott's 5 hours off the rock.